And now a little bit about our speaker. Professor Miller is a Michigan native who attended the University of Michigan, where he was editor of the Michigan Review. That's the same school that tried to stop the viewing of American Sniper. And they had a change of heart. Amazing how that works. And while at Michigan, he met his future wife, with whom he has 3 children. And at least one goes to Hillsdale Academy. Is that right? Do they all go? All 3 go to Hillsdale Academy. It's an awesome place. If you're ever in Hillsdale, you have to check it out. He and his wife are both passionate Wolverines, a passion that runs deep in both their families. After graduation, he moved to Washington, D.C., and worked with the liberal New Republic magazine, but then moved on and went to work for several think tanks. In the process, he wrote his first book, The Unmaking of Americans, How Multiculturalism Has Undermined America's Assimilation Ethic. According to some reviewers, this book was just as important as Charles Murray's Losing Ground book in analyzing changes in American society, mostly due to liberal influences. He joined the National Review as a journalist and had the opportunity to interview George W. in the Oval Office, George W. Bush. While with the Review, he co-authored a book, A History of America's Disastrous Relationship with France. And as he said, as a result of that, they're always there when they need us. Long before the National Review experience, he dreamed about writing a novel, and that dream was realized with the publication of his book, The First Assassin, which is set in the exciting story set in the Civil War. His love for football led to writing about it with his 5th and latest book, published in 2011, entitled The Big Scrum, How Teddy Roosevelt Saved Football. The Chronicle of Higher Education has called him one of the best literary journalists in the country today. He's founder and president of the Student Free Press Association. It's a group that helps improve campus journalism and helps young journalists get internships at conservative media outlets. And at Hillsdale, he is the director of the Dow Program in American Journalism. As such, he is also the head of Hillsdale's new campus radio station, and I love this, it's called Radio Free Hillsdale. On campus, he teaches classes, oversees the school paper, administers scholarships and internships. And as he says, he tries to look professorial. But best of all, he's still a practicing journalist working with the National Review. Please join me in welcoming professor and writer John Miller.
Thanks, Jerry. Jerry mentioned Hillsdale College accepts no federal aid and is almost unique in the United States in doing this. You would think that for a federal government that is $18 trillion in debt, we might get a thank you note. You know, thank you for not asking for the money we don't have. But you'd be amazed at how desperate Washington is to get control of our little college in Washington and the things we have to do to defend our freedom. So I know we have a lot of Hillsdale guests here tonight. I want to thank all of you for supporting the college and making our independence possible, and also say thanks to the rest of you for the conservative form of Silicon Valley for coming. And sign up for Imprimis if you haven't done that already. You can't be a conservative in America if you don't get Imprimis, for crying out loud. Speaking of federal deficits and debts, Jane Carney and Ken Smith did us the favor of reminding us that our income taxes are due tomorrow, which I know just makes us swell with patriotic fervor. You'll remember the line from the last Democratic convention where they said, government is the one thing we all belong to, right? You remember that one? So tomorrow's like the day where we pay our membership fee. Now, I have a few pet projects in politics, sort of crazy ideas, crazy good ideas. They are, one is to repeal the 17th Amendment because it's an offense to federalism. Another is to end the spectacle of the televised State of the Union address because it smacks of monarchy. Things like that. The one thing I'd really love to see happen, though, is have income tax day move to about the middle of October and also eliminate withholding so that about 2 weeks before federal elections, we all had to write a big check to the government so that we know how much this thing is costing us. But it's in the middle of April, which is as far away on the calendar from November as you can get, basically. I think that's not a coincidence. By the way, I just saw the other day, let me pull this out here. There's a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and it's on traffic accidents on April 15th. This is serious. I am not making this up. It turns out that fatalities rise by 6% on the roads on income tax day. So it's killing us. So I don't know, we had a guy talk about the fair tax, the flat tax, whatever. Let's just make the day less stressful, for crying out loud. This day is really hurting us. Anyway, thanks for having me out here, Jerry. I really appreciate the invitation. It's good to see you and meet so many people. Erica and John Emirati are here. I know them from National Review cruises, so it's nice to see them. My brother and his wife are here, so it's good to see some familiar faces. Are there any other National Review cruisers in the audience, or just the Amirites? We should all go on National Review cruises. We're going to Alaska in July. That's going to be a lot of fun. This is one of the treats of working for National Review, is you get to go on the cruises about once a year. I work for a magazine that goes on cruises. The only thing that would be better is if I was working for a cruise line that also put out a magazine. But I'll take what we have. Tomorrow I'm going to a Giants game for the first time. I don't know if we have Giants fans. Now I'm a Tigers fan, a Detroit Tigers fan. So I'm a little annoyed at the Giants. I'm jealous, of course, of the Giants, but tomorrow night is going to be my 21st Major League ballpark. I'm really looking forward to it. It looks like a beautiful stadium, and I'll let you in on one of the little secrets of my National Review political reporting. Is I've made a concerted effort to coordinate my election coverage with ballparks I haven't been to yet. So, for example, when I was covering Pat Toomey's Senate race, when did he run? 2010, I think. I was only available when the Phillies had home games. I was only available to go to Pennsylvania then. So don't tell my editor, but I plan that way. Anyway, one of the things you learn when you work at National Review and in the field of opinion journalism is that opinions are cheap. Everybody has them, and the way you try to distinguish yourself is that you do reporting. You try to learn facts, you bring new information to the table, and you have that inform the opinions you have and the ideas that you want to convey. And before we get started with the main part of my remarks, and I thought we'd do something a little bit fun, maybe generate a little bit of information here. I want to have a straw poll about what you guys are thinking about 2016. Does that sound like fun? See who likes which candidates, that sort of thing. So here's what I propose doing. And I don't know, what are you guys representative of? I don't know, not America, not California. I don't know, you're Silicon Valley conservatives, right? See, we'll do this, and I'll be able to go back to Hillsdale and say, I've really got my finger on the pulse of what Silicon Valley conservatives are thinking, because we're going to know the answers to the straw poll in a moment. So here's what I propose doing. I made a list of 12 candidates. And we'll just go through each one of them, and if that's your candidate, just raise your hand. Okay, and if you're just leaning for someone, just raise your hand. You're not obliged to vote for this person in 9 months or whatever. And the list of 12 I have, I'm going to read the list of 12 so you know who's on it. And, oh, Mally. No, your meeting's next door. Did you see the Saturday Night Live skit on citizens? You will elect me as your leader. But then she said, this was the Hillary Clinton parody, and then she said, Martin O'Malley, he sounds like a character from The Simpsons. All right, so I'm going to read the list of 12 candidates, just so you know who's on the list, and then we'll go back and do it more slowly, and just raise your hand then if who you want. So these are the 12 I have on the list. Jeb Bush, Ben Carson, Chris Christie, Ted Cruz, Carly Fiorina, Mike Huckabee, Bobby Jindal, Rand Paul, Rick Perry, Marco Rubio, Rick Santorum, Scott Walker. Does that about cover it? It's like there's no point in like Pataki, right? We don't need, we can dispense with your, all right, is that a good list? Anybody missing? She's not going to run. Sarah Palin's not going to run. All right, John Kasich? We'll put John Kasich on this list. All right, so we have a baker's dozen. All right, I'm going to go through the names. Just raise your hand if that's your guy or gal. Who? No, just vote for one. Just for, oh, come on. Make up your minds. I know in a lot of places you can vote more than once, but and I don't know how you do it in California, but we're gonna pick one. All right, Jeb Bush. Ooh. I saw there's, all right, two. I got two. All right. Ben Carson. Good. Chris Christie. Less popular, oh, equally popular with Jeb. Ted Cruz. All right, we have a front runner. Carly Fiorina. All right, see, I was curious. What does Silicon Valley think of Carly? Mike Huckabee. Bobby Jindal. Like, who's Bobby Jindal? Jeez, okay. Rand Paul. I was thinking maybe stronger on that one, but all right. Rick Perry. One. Marco Rubio. Rick Santorum. Scott Walker. Ooh. I think we got more Walker than Cruz. Last one, John Kasich, governor of Ohio. All right, about 5 of you. Scott, I'm calling this for Walker. With Ted Cruz a strong second. And then third, I don't know, it's kind of a big gap. Maybe probably Carson's third. So Walker, Cruz, Carson, that's the pulse of Silicon Valley. So we all know that now. All right. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the conservatives in the media. You know, we conservatives are really good about complaining about the media, about journalism. And we need to become better at making journalism great. And we have an outstanding opportunity to do that right now because journalism is in a real transition. It's a moment of disruption in the news industry right now. And the phase of journalism that we're moving into, we're already well on our way there, but it's still developing, is going to look a lot more like the journalism of the 18th and the 19th centuries than the journalism of the 20th centuries, the journalism that we all grew up with. I'll explain why in a moment, but it's going to look a lot more like it did in the founding era than it did during the Cold War. And this is a good thing for conservatives, but we're also not making the most of this opportunity. So I want to start with a story. At Hillsdale College, as you know, we like the founding fathers, we like the founding era, we make our students read primary documents, this sort of thing. So I'm going to start with a story about Alexis de Tocqueville. Not exactly a founding father, but a guy from the early republic, right? Comes over from France, studies America, writes a great book about America, a thick book on America. You can't get out of Hillsdale without reading a little Tocqueville. And in fact, a lot of our students read an awful lot of Tocqueville. But he came from France to the United States to study our country, to learn about what makes our democracy tick. And in the early 1830s, when he was traveling around and doing this, he got on a ship in, it was either Erie, Pennsylvania or Cleveland, but got onto Lake Erie, took the ship up the Detroit River, and got off in Detroit. And I like telling this story because Detroit's in Michigan, just like Hillsdale College. But he gets off the ship in Detroit, and Detroit's kind of a frontier town at this point, but it's also a city. And Tocqueville recognized it as a city. He says, you know, there are certain things about this place that make it like every other city in the world. He says you can go to a store and buy a dress, and you can get the same dress that a lady in London could buy, and it has all these aspects of a city that you can find in any city in the world. But then he left Detroit and he went into the wilderness of Michigan. I don't know how far he went. I don't think he got as far as Hillsdale. But he goes off into the woods, into the wilderness, away from the city, into the wilderness of Michigan with the trees and all that. And as he's describing this, you can almost hear like the banjo music from Deliverance in the background. And it's getting more and more rustic and so on. And he comes upon a little cabin in the middle of nowhere in Michigan, and he goes in and he meets the people who live there. And he says, if this was in Europe, this would be a peasant, and the peasant would be illiterate, and he'd be it'd be a sort of a hard scrabble living, trying to make a life from the land, and just, you know, sustaining yourself, and that's all. He says that there were certain aspects that are like that here in Michigan, but you know what was different is you walk into this cabin and you see a stack of newspapers. He said this is one of the things that makes America different. Everybody reads, and they remain engaged, and they're active participants in their democracy. And the reading of newspapers is fundamental to this. And he wrote this. Then when he went and wrote his great book on American democracy, he said this: we should underrate their importance. He's talking about newspapers. We should underrate their importance if we thought they just guaranteed liberty. They maintain civilization. So that's what Tocqueville said of newspapers. Now, at Hillsdale, our president, Larry Arnn, likes to say we're in the America-saving business, and we're sort of playing a long game at Hillsdale, trying to teach first principles to young people, trying to teach them to everybody through the online courses and so forth. Oftentimes when we talk about saving America, though, we're thinking more urgently about elections and electing statesmen and saving America a little more quickly than that. None of this can be done, though, without good journalism, without good newspapers. And when I say newspapers, what I really mean is the media now. Television, radio, websites, Twitter, viral videos, all of that. But when we talk about, well, Tocqueville loved newspapers. Then there's Thomas Jefferson, who had this to say: the man who never looks into a newspaper is better informed than he who reads them. Which I think we can all sympathize with. You know, but Tocqueville is a lover of American newspapers. Jefferson couldn't stand them. He had some reasons for not loving them. Of course, you know, but then there's Tocqueville, says they maintain civilization. But we run now in our day and time, we run into this rather large problem of liberal media bias. You know, I kind of get what Thomas Jefferson is saying. I think we all understand that. We're frustrated by the lack of accountability. I mean, look at Rolling Stone magazine. It perpetrated a hoax. That's what it was. It was a hoax. And not a single person lost a job over it. You know, the editor of Rolling Stone magazine makes almost $1 million a year. He didn't even take a pay cut, I bet. But not a single person lost a job. Lack of accountability. That's a huge problem in journalism today. You know, I was just talking to Brian Williams about this, and he said when he was editor of Rolling Stone magazine, this never would have happened. Now, I run the journalism program at Hillsdale College. It is the Dow journalism program, Dow, D-O-W, like Dow Chemical, Dow Industries, a Michigan company, right? The endowment for my journalism program comes from that fortune. And there's a legend about how this program came to be, which is that in the 1980s, when it didn't exist, you may remember there was a big controversy over silicone breast implants. And this was a there were class action lawsuits against Dow Corning, which made the silicone. This was hugely controversial. It was covered, I remember reading about it in the Wall Street Journal all the time, you know, every little twist and turn. Well, the legend is that Herbert Dow, who is the namesake of the journalism program, was so fed up with the coverage. He said it was so bad with journalists who misunderstood facts of science, were hostile to industry. It was so bad, he said, by golly, I'm going to start a journalism program. And he called up Hillsdale College, and it led to the Dow journalism program. Now, it gives new meaning to when I say the endowment for our program. But the birth of our program comes from frustration with the poor quality of American journalism, and we're trying to fix that. And at a certain level, the problem isn't merely bad journalism. You know, there's bad journalism just like there's bad lawyering, and there's bad, I don't know, software programming. You know, in every profession, there are problems and there are underperformers, and journalism is no different. One of the differences with journalism is that the mistakes are on public display. You know, if you make a mistake in journalism, everybody's going to know, or at least everybody has the capacity to know. Everybody sees it. But what we're talking about here with liberal media bias is a different kind of badness. We're talking about walking into, walking into a room and looking at reality in a way that distorts it like a funhouse mirror, and then everybody denies that you're at a freak show. This is the kind of badness we're talking about here, and we've all seen the statistics about how liberal reporters are. I mean, I could cite, you know, what percentage of them voted for Barack Obama, and this is a recurring thing. I did look up a recent poll of this type. Last year, a couple of researchers at Indiana University found that 7% of journalists call themselves Republican. 7% of journalists call themselves Republican. This is the lowest percentage ever, and they've been doing this survey since 1971. 7%. Now, these same journalists will always say, well, that might be true, but it doesn't affect our coverage. How could it not, you know, but even on their own terms? I mean, these are the same people who are always talking about the wonders of diversity and so on. You know, the only place that may be less intellectually diverse than a newsroom is a faculty lounge. And that's saying something. And what this means is that journalists just do not run into other kinds of people with different sorts of viewpoints on a routine basis. They don't hear much about how regulations hurt small business. They don't hear much about why somebody in rural Michigan or rural California, or really anywhere, might want a gun. They don't hear much about failures of the welfare state. They don't hear much about this stuff. They just don't get it. So we see the phenomena of liberal media bias. Now here's the other thing. Here's kind of the secret about liberal media bias that you also need to understand. These people are not waking up every morning thinking about, how can I stick it to the Republicans today? How can I stick it to the conservatives? They don't wake up thinking that. The problem's actually worse. They don't realize they're doing it. Okay, they think they're being fair, and they think everyone thinks the way they do, because they don't rub shoulders with people who have different kinds of viewpoints. They engage in groupthink. You know, this sort of concurrence-seeking phenomenon. They're victims of confirmation bias again and again. There's a herd mentality to what they do. I've seen this on display myself. I remember I was covering Marco Rubio's Senate election in 2010, and I went to a debate with the two other candidates. You may recall this was the race where Charlie Crist started out as a Republican, and then he became an independent. And his evolution has proceeded, as you know, but there was a third candidate who was a Democrat. So there were three major candidates in this race. And the debate was in Miami. It was at Univision, the Spanish language station, and it was in the middle of the day. And the debate took place in one room, and we reporters were in another room. We were watching it on TV. There was like a closed caption thing going on. And interestingly, it was Univision, but it was all done in English, right? It's a Spanish language network, but it was all done in English. And they had one rule for the debate, for the candidates. They had a couple rules, but one major rule for the debate was none of them were allowed to speak in Spanish. And the reason they had this rule is because Marco Rubio is fluent in Spanish, and the other two guys didn't know any Spanish at all. So it kind of made sense, right? They're going to do the whole thing in English. And so they did, and they had their debate, and then the candidates came out and they did little press scrums and so on. And when the whole thing was over, all the Florida reporters got together in like a huddle, and they said, "What's the story here? What's the lead? What's the headline?" And they knocked around a few different ideas, and they came up with something Rubio said that they thought was mildly controversial. Right? This was the herd mentality at work. And so they all went back to Orlando and Tampa and Gainesville and Jacksonville and Fort Lauderdale, and they all had the same story because they'd had their little huddle and decided what was news. I thought the most interesting thing was, and this is none of it, this didn't, and I was eavesdropping on their conversation. I found it fascinating. The most interesting thing was the two guys who broke the no Spanish rule were the two guys who couldn't speak it. Rubio didn't say a word in Spanish that whole debate. He abided by the rule. The other two, Crist and Kendrick Meek, who was the Democratic candidate, both had these really awkward, "Hola, mi amigos," kind of moments where they had rehearsed a line in bad Spanish about that they wanted to speak directly to the viewers of Univision. I thought that was the lead, maybe, but the herd mentality didn't see that way. So we have groupthink taking place. Now the word groupthink, you've all heard it before. It was coined by a psychologist. He was playing off another word you've all heard, which is doublethink, which comes from George Orwell in his novel 1984. So the word groupthink was not invented by Orwell, but it's a reference to Orwell and doublethink. And doublethink, you'll remember, is the ability to hold two contradictory views at the same time, right? War is peace, freedom is slavery. That's doublethink from 1984. Well, liberalism is beset by doublethink right now. Tolerance is a social virtue until we have the case of the nun who runs a flower shop who doesn't want to work at a gay wedding. Then we can't have tolerance. Dissent is the highest form of patriotism when there's a Republican in the White House. And when there's not, when three Tea Party guys get together for a meeting, it's evidence of racism, right? The value, the championing of diversity and looking like America, but not intellectual diversity, right? This is the kind of doublethink we find, and with liberals and LiberalMedia Bias, we so often get doublethink and groupthink at the same time, and it achieves a kind of hybrid vigor. And this is not just in the big themes about tolerance, but and diversity and so on and so forth. It's also right down into the words and phrases we use every day. So think about a phrase like women's rights. Are you for women's rights? Is that candidate for women's rights? Is that candidate against women's rights? Is that candidate for civil rights? Is that candidate against civil rights? You immediately sense how this works and whose favor it works for and whose favor it works against, right? I mean, is there anybody actually in America who's against women's rights, you know, in a sort of fundamental way? The answer is no. There's some different visions of what that might mean, but we all know what they're talking about when they speak this way. The Associated Press, you may have seen, recently banned the terms illegal alien and illegal immigrant. This is the sort of thing we're talking about. They're trying to use different words and phrases to affect the way we think. By the way, I was on Twitter yesterday and I found the Associated Press had this to say with a tweet. The Associated Press, by the way, is supposed to be objective news reporting, right? This was a tweet from yesterday from the AP. It's a little picture, you may be able to see it. It's President Obama with Raul Castro. You know, they had their meeting. And here's what the tweet says. After triumphs abroad, President Obama finds stern challenges at home on his foreign policy. After triumphs abroad. Now, I don't know what, you know, you can have different views about President Obama and his foreign policy. You're going to have a hard time convincing anybody that this guy has been leaping from success to success on the world stage, right? With this Iran deal, with what's happening in Syria, with Yemen apparently no longer a country. The world is not a safer place today than it was a few years ago. But AP, after triumphs abroad, President Obama, you know, not even, you know, he didn't just merely make progress or something abroad. He didn't have a good week. No, he has triumphs abroad. Anyway, that's AP. The other word that really distresses me is the word conservative. Have you ever noticed when the AP or other news outlets cover other countries, you know, when they talk about maybe conservative forces in Iran, they're talking about the mullahs and the ayatollahs and the terrorists. That's who they're talking about. When they refer to conservative forces in Moscow, it's Kremlin hardliners, right? The old school communists. Conservatives in Beijing are the kinds of people who want another Tiananmen Square massacre, right? Those are the conservatives. And there's a kind of logic to when they use that word. You know, it's a small c conservative. But we also know the trick that they're playing. So this goes right down to the individual words they use every single day in their reporting. There was a study a couple psychologists did a number of years ago where they wanted to look at the impact of certain words and phrases on how we think about things. And they took a group of students, these were university professors, they took a group of students and they showed them a video of two cars crashing into each other, just running into each other. You know, glass, shat, whatever. And then they separated the groups into different, there were basically two categories of them. And they asked one group, at what speed were the cars traveling when they smashed into each other? And the other group they asked, at what speed were the cars traveling when they made contact? Smashed and made contact. Smashed, they said 40 miles an hour. Made contact, they said 30 miles an hour. And what that shows is the power of individual words to shape our thinking. Now, the researchers were interested in witnesses and memory in terms of court procedures and testimony and that sort of thing. You can understand how this would have applications in a courtroom. I think it has tremendous implications for journalism. Right down to the words we use to describe things affects our perceptions of reality. Smash, contacted, it's an incredibly, it's a huge difference. Now, the biggest piece of doublethink of all on the left is this notion that I will defend your right to say it to the death. I will defend to the death your right to say it, at least until you offend somebody, right? Now, at the University of Iowa in December, they had a visiting artist on campus, and he wanted to make an anti-racism sculpture. And so he created this figure, and it was wrapped and sort of swaddled in newsprint with different newspaper stories. and he put this figure at the center of campus. Well, the figure was actually, the statue was actually in the form of a Klansman, right, with the sort of the pointy dunce cap that the KKK people seem to like. Puts it in the middle of campus, and he means it as an anti-racist kind of statement, but it looks like a Klansman. So you can just imagine what happened. You know, immediately people are taking offense, they're outraged, and so forth. And instead of having a good debate about the meaning of this piece, you know, is it in good taste, bad taste, whatever, what does it mean? There were calls to remove it, and the thing was taken down. The head of the journalism program at the University of Iowa, the head of the journalism program said this: "If it was up to me and me alone, I would follow the lead of every European nation and ban this type of speech." The journalism program. I mean, the guy who's supposed to remember the First Amendment, right? That's what the head of the journalism program there said. And I thought, you know, yeah, follow the lead of every European nation and ban this type of speech. You know who else bans this kind of speech? Cuba, North Korea, Iran, Saudi Arabia, right? Those are the people you're talking. That's what you want to be, right? That's what you're talking about. Now, the timing of this comment was awkward, because a few days later, what happened? The Charlie Hebdo massacres in Paris. That shows you what happens when you start talking about, you know, banning speech and taking offense and so on and so forth. We had all these great marches in defense of free speech in Paris and so forth, and you know, not everybody published the cover of Charlie Hebdo in that first issue after the massacre. You guys may remember the cover. You've probably seen it somewhere. You know, the green background it was an image of Muhammad, which you're not supposed to do, right? The New York Times wouldn't publish that cover. The readers of the New York Times, if you only got your news from the New York Times, you've never seen that cover. You've never seen that cover. You know what you have seen in the New York Times? You've seen pictures of Piss Christ, the NEA-funded work of art in which a crucifix was immersed in urine. They printed that picture. They printed a picture a few years ago of an art exhibit in Brooklyn where the Virgin Mary was smeared with elephant dung and amid pornographic images. They printed that picture, but they wouldn't print the Charlie Hebdo picture. So the New York Times may say it will defend to the death our right to say things, but it will not print that picture. I was actually in Europe a week ago. I got back a week ago. I was in Europe. I was in Greece and Italy. And I saw an issue of Charlie Hebdo. Has anybody ever seen an issue of Charlie Hebdo? I'd never seen one before. And there it was on the newsstand. So I picked it up and flipped through it, and I couldn't understand a word because it's all in French. But it has these cartoons and so forth, and I got a sense of the mischief it tries to make in every issue. But you know what else? You know what really struck me? Not a single advertisement. Not a single advertisement. You know, if I'm French and I really believe in Charlie Hebdo and its mission and free speech, I'm thinking about taking out a full-page ad in their next issue. That's a hard thing to do, you know. But I was struck by that. Not a single ad in that issue. Now, in the United States, of course, we have the First Amendment with freedom of the press. And it's in the First Amendment for a reason. It has a kind of pride of place, doesn't it? It's not a coincidence that freedom of the press is in the First Amendment. Well, we look at these things and we call them double standards, we call them hypocrisy. They call it objectivity. We have a kind of cult of objectivity in journalism. And objectivity sounds great on paper. It sounds great when you're in a classroom at the University of Iowa talking about the importance of objectivity. What we really have is phony objectivity in too many newsrooms. We have kind of journalistic sanctimony is what we have. And the fact that we had this cult of objectivity is actually digression from older patterns in American history. Now, when Tocqueville said newspapers maintain civilization, he was not looking at yesterday's New York Times. He was looking at the newspapers of the 1830s, which were very much like the newspapers of the founding era. And man, if you think Twitter is mean and the comment section on your favorite blog are mean, you should read what the newspapers in the 1790s were saying about George Washington, for crying out loud, or what they were saying about Abraham Lincoln in 1860. These are vicious publications. We're no meaner today than they were then. Their newspapers were meaner than ours are now. We also see journalistic greatness in this era. Benjamin Franklin, he was a printer, a writer, an editor. He was a journalist. Thomas Paine, what is Common Sense but a work of journalism? It's published as a pamphlet. The Federalist Papers. We think of the Federalist Papers as this book you buy, you know, and you read. The Federalist Papers were 85 op-eds printed in newspapers. That's how Americans of the time read them, this defense of the Constitution. Some people say, some of my colleagues at Hillsdale say this is the single most important work of American political philosophy, the Federalist Papers. Newspaper op-eds, they were journalism. So that era produced great journalism. It also produced scandalous journalism. One of my favorite figures from this period is a guy named James Callender. You maybe never heard of him before. He broke two of the biggest stories in American history. Journalism professors tend not to like to talk about him because he's a little scandalous. But in the 1790s, he noticed some financial improprieties, alleged financial improprieties in the Department of the Treasury. And he wrote about them. Well, who is the Secretary of the Treasury? The guy in the $10 bill, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton defended himself by coming out and saying those payments were personal payments made by me to my mistress. And when you ever wonder why Alexander Hamilton didn't become president, this is a big reason why. Because of this personal scandal that James Callender, a journalist in the 1790s, exposed. Callender thought he'd caught Hamilton with his hand in the fist, and actually it wasn't true. Hamilton was spending some personal funds to pay off a mistress, and he had to admit this in public. What he wanted people to know he sinned in his private life, but not in his public life. And this is a very important distinction to him. It cost him his, you know, he's the one great founding father who didn't become president. Would he have? I don't know. It didn't help that Aaron Burr shot him. But this really ended his immediate kind of political ambitions, this admission that James Callender, this guy exposed. Now, James Callender, he was a journalist. He was also a hired gun. He worked for a partisan newspaper, a Jeffersonian newspaper that was anti-Federalist, anti-Hamilton, anti-Washington, viciously so. And when he performed this feat, he thought, oh, when Thomas Jefferson's elected president, I'll get a great job in the Jefferson administration. He wanted to be postmaster of Richmond or something like that, right? Well, Jefferson didn't get him a job, and so he was really mad, and he switched sides. So he started working for a Federalist newspaper in Richmond, and he started working against the Jeffersonians and against Jefferson in particular. Have you ever heard the name Sally Hemings? It's because of this guy. Now, his reporting on Sally Hemings was sketchy. It was racist. It was a lot of bad things, but he broke the story. He broke the story. But this is the kind of thing that he also wound up dead in the James River. About 2 years later, he had drowned in about 18 inches of water. The claim is that he had gotten drunk and fell down in the river. Others have wondered, but that was his fate. You hear very little said about him in schools of journalism and journalism because the journalism profession is a little embarrassed by this guy. But there's no denying he broke two great stories back in that era. Back then, of course, newspapers were often organs of political parties. They were really branches of political parties. That's why we have some newspapers called the newspaper in Little Rock is called the Democrat, right? Is it the Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Democrat Gazette? The newspaper in Springfield, Massachusetts is the Republican, where you see these names around the country, and that's a vestige of this earlier era when the newspapers were closely aligned with political parties. That started to change in the middle of the 19th century for a variety of reasons. One of them is the birth of the Associated Press. The Associated Press was started in 1846 by some newspapers that wanted to pool their resources to send reporters to Mexico to cover the war. So this would be cheaper than each of us sending our own correspondents. We'll pool our resources, get some reports from Mexico, and just share this information, right? That's the birth of the Associated Press. The Associated Press then goes on to have the insight, you know what? Instead of being partisans who are cheering for either the Republicans or the Democrats or the Whigs or whatever in Washington, why don't we just start reporting the news objectively and serving all of America? Rather than trying for half of America, we're going to try for all of America. And so the Associated Press had this insight that their commercial success could be linked to objectivity and not aligning themselves with a political party. So this is where you start to see this fracture from partisanship. And it grows and it develops, and some people say the telegraph played a role in all of this. Then you had around the turn of the century, the rise of the progressive movement and the professionalization of everything, and the idea of science and technocracy and so on. The idea that the journalism could almost become a science. The idea we could be above politics and everything. Remember, these are the people who gave rise to the administrative state. The ones whose thinking leads to the idea that let's have an environmental protection agency because it'll be staffed with experts who are above politics, right? That's the kind of thinking that goes on there. Well, journalism was affected by this too, and so by the 1920s, journalism had become a profession rather than a trade. It had become a profession with standards of professional conduct, and one of them is objectivity. And this objectivity, right? Now, objectivity is a great thing if it means critical detachment, but all too often it means detachment from reality. And it gets to the point where the AP no longer says you can use the phrases illegal alien or illegal immigrant. Those are off the books. And objectivity encourages Dan Rather to pursue George W. Bush with another famous hoax, right? You remember that. Dan Rather had a long and distinguished career as a broadcaster, and came to a crashing halt because he tried to do something along the lines of what Rolling Stone just did. He lost his job over it, though. His career ended because of that hoax. Walter Cronkite, remember him? The most trusted man in America? Did you know that George McGovern almost asked him to be his running mate in 1972? And McGovern said, you know, I didn't do it because I thought he'd say no, and that would be embarrassing. Walter Cronkite in his memoir said, you know, I had no idea that was even on the table. He said, I would have accepted in an instant. Walter Cronkite was a McGovernite. Now, conservatives have always tried their best to run around this system, the mainstream media. And, you know, the birth of National Review is an aspect of that, to give voice to conservatives, a voice they didn't have previously. Human events. The birth of direct mail is a conservative, really conservative invention, a way to speak to the public without going through the media. Think tanks with marketing arms. Talk radio, Fox News. These are all attempts to beat the mainstream media, to talk to America without having to go through the filter of the mainstream media. You'll notice, of course, that the people who are above politics scorn every one of these efforts. And what do? They're always deriding Fox News, right? They're always sneering at Fox News. Well, the Pew Research Center just did a survey of viewers of all kinds of media outlets in the country. Did you know that the viewership of Fox News, when it's broken down by party affiliation, is politically more diverse than the audiences of NPR, CNN, MSNBC, The New York Times, The Colbert Report, Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and The New Yorker? Now, these are the same entities that accuse Fox News of a lack of objectivity. Now, you can say what you want about Fox News, and I certainly have my criticisms of it, but look who's doing the criticizing. And I want to offer a giant caveat here, that in opinion journalism, when you're a conservative opinion journalist, you always have to tell the truth. You know, our readers of National Review expect the truth. They expect accurate information. They expect informed opinions. They don't want to be lied to. They don't want misinformation. They don't want propaganda. Nobody wants that. Nobody at all wants that. Our obligation is to tell the truth as we see it. But we'll never pretend to be a thing that we're not, which is what NPR and CNN and the New York Times do all the time. They have this illusion of objectivity. They claim they're objective, and they're not. They say they're fair, and they're not. They don't recognize their own biases. Now, here's where we get into the untapped potential of conservative media. Now, I mentioned one of the reasons why we have this cult of objectivity, which is dominated by the left, is partly for commercial reasons, going back to the 19th century, and this idea that single media organizations could serve the entire public. They could sell newspapers to everybody. If they didn't pick sides or pretended not to pick sides, they could sell their wire services or their newspapers or their magazines to everybody. What we're seeing right now, though, is a complete fracturing of the mainstream media. And no longer do people try to sell their message to broad audiences. There are only a few institutions that still try to do that. The road to success in the new media is niche audiences, reaching small audiences of discrete people. And you see this all the time with social media and so forth. So we're creating a new form of journalism that echoes the older form, when newspapers did pick sides. We're seeing that again now. More conservative websites, more liberal websites. We're politically more diverse on the internet than ever before. You can get a publication for everything. When was the last time any of you watched primetime TV news? Right? Can you even name the anchors? I mean, when I grew up, it was Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, and Dan Rather. Remember them, right? We all know them. I don't even know who's doing those shows now, right? And the simple fact that we don't know is evidence of the fact this model has this model of serving everybody all at once, the one-size-fits-all model of news, is dead and gone. And my students at Hillsdale College have no memory of it at all. We have memories of it because we remember those anchors. We remember sitting down and watching the evening news in 1988 or whatever it was. My students, you know how young students are in college right now? We're about 2 years away from students who have no memory of 9/11 in college. Okay? My students right now kind of remember it was a big deal in the second grade. We're about 2 years away from college students who have no memory of it at all. And a few more years away from students who weren't even alive when it happened. They have no memory of this at all. They get their information from websites and news feeds and on social media. And you know what? Conservatives run an awful lot of those things, and we can run an awful lot more. So liberal media bias is less of a problem than ever before. The problem is conservatives haven't made the most of the opportunity that's right in front of us now. In the last week, I've heard about 6 jobs in journalism. People call me and say, John, do you have any recent college graduates who'd be good for, this writer position, this editorial position? They can't find, they want conservative writers and they can't find them. Now my students who want jobs in journalism, go get them. They have no problem at all getting them. There aren't enough of my students though. There aren't enough conservatives going into journalism. In fact, there are not enough conservatives going into all of the sorts of creative fields. I'm thinking of Hollywood, book publishing, writing comic books, for crying out loud. If you believe what Andrew Breitbart said, that politics is downstream of culture, we need to think about getting conservatives into all these institutions, media first and foremost among them, and yet not enough conservatives go into that. I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure why we have this human capital problem. I think journalism's a great career. I have an enormous fun doing it myself. I can't imagine a career that's more fun in a lot of ways. This may be the ultimate triumph of liberal media bias. I mean, how many of you, if you had a child or a grandchild who came up to you and said, I'm thinking about going into journalism, I bet the first thing you'd say is, do you want to go into that liberal profession? Are you crazy? Right? That's what you'd say. That's one of the first things you'd say. The next thing you'd say is there's no money in it. The third thing you say is newspapers are dying. Right? But the truth is, it's never been easier to get a job in journalism as a conservative than now. It's only going to get better. It's enormously fun. The pay is better than you think. I told you how much the Rolling Stone editor makes. And newspapers may be dying, but digital platforms are arising. It's not quite a one-for-one trade, but there are thousands of jobs today in digital journalism that didn't exist 10 years ago. Good people who work hard and are smart and want to be successful in this profession are going to get jobs and they're going to flourish. Okay, that should be the message you give to your kids and your grandkids if they come up to you and think about journalism. In fact, you should go to them and say, you know, I bet that's a good field to go into. Because it is, and you'll be doing a service to your country, I think. So send them to me at Hillsdale College. Don't. And just a final thought, you know, when I think of great journalism, my mind turns to names like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine and Frederick Douglass. You know, what was Frederick Douglass? He's a great orator for abolition and civil rights in the 19th century. He was a newspaper publisher, people. That's how he made his living. Okay, Mark Twain, author of Huck Finn, right? That's what you think about. Mark Twain, in his lifetime, was known primarily as a nonfiction travel writer who also wrote novels. We've forgotten that. The best-selling book of his lifetime was Innocents Abroad, which is his travel account of going to Europe on basically a cruise, like National Review, but not conservatives, of Europe. It's his travel account. He was a travel journalist, and that's how people thought of him at his time. Only after his death have we come to think of him primarily as a novelist. Did you know that Winston Churchill first came to the attention of the British public through newspaper articles he wrote? Ronald Reagan, one of his first jobs was at a radio station in Iowa where he broadcast Cubs games. You want to hear a funny Reagan story? So this is an early job. He went to Eureka College. Isn't that a great name for a college, Eureka College? And he went to a radio station in Iowa where one of his jobs was to call Cubs games. Well, how do you call a Cubs game when you're in Iowa? He would get like a ticker tape transmission, and then he would tell the story of the game. Not because he was watching with his own eyes, but because he was getting the transmission. And so he'd have to make up a story, right? Talk about what a great way to develop communication skills, number one. Number two, he loved telling the story about the time when a Cubs player was at bat and the ticker tape stopped. He said that player hit more foul balls in the history of baseball. And this went on for 2 or 3 minutes, you know, and then finally the ticker tape came through again, and turned out the guy had struck out, you know, right away. So he sort of caught back up. But, you know, Reagan was a journalist, for crying out loud. George Orwell was a journalist. William F. Buckley, you know, my hero, was a journalist. So this is a great and honorable profession. We need more people doing it, and I hope you'll encourage as many young people as you can to go into it. So with that, I thank you for listening. I guess we're going to do some questions. So let's, questions about anything. We can talk about journalism, we can talk about 2016, we can talk about my favorite major league ballpark, the Tigers bullpen, whatever. I guess fire away. We've got a microphone over here on the side.
So we've got our ushers passing out cards. So wave your hand if you're interested in asking a question, and you'll get a card. Please write legibly. I've got to be able to translate them. And I'm going to kick things off with a couple of questions that I came up with. One of the criticisms I've heard of the modern, I guess you'd call it diversification of journalism, is that people tend to get news that they focus on news that validates their own belief system. They don't hear the other side. I wonder if you could respond to that criticism.
So the question is do too many people get news that simply validates their own views? Do we enjoy, are we members of the choir and we enjoy getting preached to, right? That's basically the question. First of all, I think there's when we use the phrase preaching to the choir, we use it in a negative sense, like this is a bad thing. Number one, I think the choir often needs preaching to, right? I think this is actually a good thing. And when I read National Review, I'm learning stuff all the time, right? I don't feel like I'm getting preached to, and then I'm a member of a choir. I feel like I'm learning stuff and I'm getting better. Okay, so number one, I almost reject the premise of that. Number two, though, that's the wrong problem. The problem is not that people are talking past each other. The real problem is apathy. That there aren't enough people engaged in thinking about these issues. And this is, you will find, data show that people who like to read opinion journalism actually seek out opposing viewpoints. How many of you will take a peek at, The New Republic or Mother Jones just to see what the other side is thinking? Okay? Politically engaged people do that. They make a habit of it. So this notion that we're in our silos, there's certainly that can exist, but the notion that we're all in our silos, I think, is just false. We actually are talking to each other more than we realize. The problem is there are some people who are not, a lot of people who are not engaged in this conversation at all. They don't know the difference between left and right.
All right. One of the phrases I hate the most is free speech zones. I kind of thought free speech zone was bordered by the Pacific and Atlantic on either side, and Mexico and Canada on top and bottom. But that seems to be a popular thing on college campuses. I wonder if you could comment on that.
I'm for big free speech zones. Yeah, this is a silly thing, these free speech zones, and we need to protect the delicate sensibilities of young adults on college campuses. They can't handle arguments or hard truths or challenges. What an absurdity that is. I don't know what more to say about it. One of the things that made me a conservative was when I set foot on campus at the University of Michigan, and the first thing they handed us at orientation, one of the first things was a pamphlet that described what we could say and what we couldn't say. This was one of the first speech codes at an American university, and it was subsequently ruled unconstitutional in federal court. And I have to say, as much as I disagree with the ACLU, it was the ACLU that brought the case, and I'll be forever thankful that they did. They defended the free speech rights of students, and particularly conservative students at the University of Michigan back when I was there. But this little pamphlet we got said things like, if you put a Confederate flag on your dorm room door, you're a harasser. It also said that if you're a member of a student club that hires a comedian who goes on stage and tells a joke that offends somebody, then you're a harasser. It's stuff like this. So, all of America should be a free speech zone, I think. Yeah.
You mentioned very briefly during your talk you might have criticisms of Fox News. Can you expand on that?
Yes, I can. So there are a lot of good things about Fox News. I'll tell you what I like about Fox News. I like the 6 o'clock show. I don't watch it very much, but I think it's pretty good. I think their panel is pretty good. I love Charles Krauthammer. They've now got George Will. I like Steve Hayes. Fun fact, Steve Hayes' great-grandfather was a president of Hillsdale College. They've got some very smart commentators on there. They're often worth listening to. But you know what Fox News really needs? It needs a competitor. There ought to be a second conservative cable news channel. That's what I think it needs. Remember, we're the side that believes in competition. And I often say the best thing that ever happened in National Review, at least in my lifetime, the best thing that happened in National Review was the Weekly Standard. because suddenly we had competition, people fighting for the same readers. It made National Review better. I think Fox News could be better if it had a competitor. Right now it doesn't have to fight for its viewers, and I think it can often take people for granted. And you notice some, I'll leave it at that. Fox News needs a competitor. It'll be good for everyone.
Can you comment on your alma mater's flip-flop on American Sniper?
So you heard about this, right? So I haven't seen American Sniper. Has anybody seen it? Is it a great film? All right, I've not seen it. So they wanted to screen it at the University of Michigan, and there were some students who objected. You know, it's racist, it's militaristic. You can imagine what they said. And so the university canceled the screening and decided to show the film Paddington Bear instead. And you can't make this up, right? Yeah, and then PETA probably didn't like that. The animal rights people didn't like that. Well, there was such a ruckus caused over this, and actually it was a conservative student journalist at the University of Michigan, the guy who's editor of the Michigan Review, my old newspaper, who actually broke the story nationally. I think it might have broken anyway, but he had the scoop on it, and so it took a student to speak up and say, this is happening. You know, the Detroit News didn't have the story. Detroit Free Press didn't have the story. A kid had the story. That's why we heard about it. He wrote about it. Drudge linked to it. Drudge is the gold standard in links on the web. That's what happened. That's why we all heard about it. That's why Jim Harbaugh tweeted about it, right? They wound up, I think, showing the film last weekend. I guess they had Paddington Bear, and then a few days later they did American Sniper. But I don't know. American Sniper. Can we make a joke about trigger warnings? Get it? All right.
To what extent would you say the biased media or the media that wasn't doing its job was responsible for Obama becoming the nominee and ultimately president?
I don't know. I have a friend whose name is Tim Grossclose. He was recently at UCLA, political scientist. He just moved to George Mason University. He has a book called Left Turn that goes into exactly this question. And he has all kinds of data, and he crunches numbers, and there are calculations, and I quickly get confused. But he claims that liberal media bias accounts for about a 10 to 15 point swing in American politics. You know, I don't know if that's true or not, but he makes a really interesting case for why it is true, and how the media, in fact, pushes views leftward. That's what I would do, is I'd refer you to this book by Tim Grossclose. It's called Left Turn. He makes an argument that it's a quite large impact on voter behavior.
Okay, I think this questioner wants to challenge a little bit your assertion about the abundance of jobs for conservative college grads. He says, I spent 30 years in TV news and print and fought against liberal bias. With only 7% Republicans in journalism, why would they want to hire young conservative college grads?
See, my point is the 7%, they're all in the legacy media. They're all in the old newspapers. They're all in that. All right? The new jobs are completely different. And a lot of these digital news sites are full of the same liberals, but some of them are completely new inventions of conservatives. I'm thinking of the Daily Caller. I'm thinking of the Washington Free Beacon. I'm thinking of, the one I've just seen recently is IJR. Have you guys seen this one? I forget what it stands for. I know of two more that are launching. There's The Blaze. We could go on and on and on. These things didn't exist 5 and 6 years ago. The Washington Examiner. These things didn't exist just a few years ago. They exist now. They need to hire people, and they can't find them. So look, liberal media bias is a real problem, but Students who want jobs in this field, conservative students, can find them.
Now that the federal government is in the process of taking over the internet, what effect do you think that'll have on conservative media?
I don't know. I guess this is a reference to the net neutrality, that whole fight. I don't know what effect that'll have. It is net neutrality restricts the ability of providers to determine how content is given and received. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
It probably won't be good, but I don't know the answer to that.
Can you speak about the intimidation of investigative journalists such as Cheryl Atkinson?
Cheryl Atkinson, we had her Hillsdale in January. She gave a good speech to our students. She has incredible claims about how the Obama administration has come after her and harassed her personally. The thing about Cheryl Atkinson is, I don't know if I've met her. I had dinner with her when she was on campus. This lady does not have a political bone in her body. I mean, she is really actually, objectivity kind of in its ideal form. I mean, it's not phony objectivity. She just wants good stories, and she wants to investigate government corruption. She doesn't care who's running the government. She's just a good journalist. She's actually a little creeped out by the fact that conservatives like her so much right now. She's not used to it. I mean, it gives her the heebie-jeebies because, she's not a conservative herself. She's not a liberal either, really. She just but she doesn't want to become, a cheerleader for one side or she doesn't want the perception of being used by one side or the other. We've seen with this Obama administration some rather troubling examples of attempts to intimidate journalists. You probably saw James Rosen of Fox News. We've heard about wiretappings, so on and so forth, and you will hear even liberal White House reporters who will whisper among themselves about how this White House is less transparent and more closed than the Bush White House was. And they complained about the Bush White House an awful lot, and what they'll say to you, at least in private, is that the Obama White House is worse.
What do you think about James O'Keefe?
Not a journalist. I kind of cheer for James O'Keefe, but I want to hold him at a bit of a distance. I like the results that he often produces, but as a journalist, I don't think you can ever lie about who you are, right? You can't put on a disguise and pretend you're somebody you're not. What he does strikes me as more guerrilla theater, with kind of a political purpose to it, and with some political results, but I don't know that I would call him a journalist. Yeah, well, good luck to James O'Keefe. As I say, I cheer for him, right? I want him to succeed. I want him to have great success. He's hit a couple of home runs, that guy has, and he's made America better for having done it. But I do like to think he does something different from what journalists do.
We've had several speakers on Islam. I'd like if you could talk about free speech in the context of the worldwide advance of Sharia, and in particular maybe related to what's happening in Dearborn, Michigan, if you're familiar with that.
I'm not sure what the reference to Dearborn is. There are a lot of Arabs in Dearborn, Michigan. A lot of them are Christian, in fact. There are also many Muslims in Dearborn. I'm not familiar if there's a particular incident the questioner is referring to. Look, some of the countries that have the least press freedom in the world are in the Middle East. You want to look at a closed society where there's no such thing as press freedom? Go to Iran. Go to Syria. Go to Turkey, where they're trying to shut down Twitter accounts every other week. That press freedom is in its worst condition in a lot of those countries.
What's your view about how the general media has treated Benjamin Netanyahu in the last year?
first of all, Benjamin Netanyahu, I mean, what a hero. Israel is this oasis of freedom amid tyranny. I don't know how you can't not cheer for this little country, facing incredible odds. We have a president who's now trying to negotiate a nuclear deal with a country that is on the record for the annihilation of the country of Israel. And Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, is standing up against that. It's a David and Goliath story, and I'm for David. I think the treatment of Netanyahu in the mainstream press has been questionable. I'll tell you, the mainstream press has treated him a lot better than, say, the campus press or the universities have done. Anti-Semitism is alive and well on a lot of American campuses. This is a real problem, and we ignored it at our peril. I was also flabbergasted when, the White House was complaining that Congress couldn't invite Benjamin Netanyahu to come speak. I mean, there's this idea. This is the progressives and the rise of the administrative state. The idea that the president is like the boss of American government, but Congress, as we all know, is a co-equal branch, and not only is it's actually a little more than a co-equal branch. When you read the Constitution, which branch does it talk about first? It's Congress. If they want to have a foreign leader come speak to them, they have every right to do it, and the White House should just keep silent. They can criticize it, I suppose, but it doesn't need to become, some kind of offense to the executive branch. But that's not a media question.
What do you think of Rand Paul's attempt to challenge the liberal media, such as Savannah Guthrie? Is that a good idea or ill-advised?
I'm embarrassed to say I'm not sure who Savannah Guthrie is. Who is this person? I'm not missing much. So yeah, go Rand Paul, challenge Savannah Guthrie. I think there should be more challenging of Savannah Guthrie in American politics.
She was an interviewer who asked him some challenging questions, and they had I don't know if you'd even call it a testy exchange, but a strong exchange.
I am sympathetic to interviewers who ask challenging questions. I am a believer in the fact there's no such thing as a bad question. There are only bad answers. But I didn't see this particular exchange.
All right, just a couple more questions here. This questioner asks, do you think that conservative journalists should get more angry? And I suppose by angry, maybe they mean more stridently conservative. I'm not sure, but you can comment on however you like.
I know an awful lot of angry conservative journalists. Have you ever listened to Mark Levin? I don't know. We need conservative journalists of all stripes. I'll tell you, emotional writing, emotional speaking on talk radio, that can be some of the most powerful things we hear. You need to be a little, you need to control it when you do it. I mean, some of the most powerful writing is when you can really tell the writer is full of emotion and really cares, passionate about it. There's a fine line between emotional and unhinged, though, and it can be very hard to know when you're crossing that line and when you're not. That's why we have editors. We need people of all kinds of temperament. I guess we need editors of calm disposition, making sure we're all doing good work.
All right, we'll make this last one an opportunity for you to either challenge or refute this questioner or endorse the perspective. He says your next book ought to be titled 1950 to 2015, The Decline and Demise of American Journalism.
Yeah, but I'm optimistic about journalism right now. So it could be the decline and demise and rise again of American journalism, because I really do think it's better now than it was a generation ago. It's better for conservatives, and it's going to get better still. What we as conservatives need to do is take advantage of this opportunity that's in front of us. And we have it in so many areas right now. Not just journalism. You know, are you concerned about the left's stranglehold on American higher education? Well, you know what? We have a gift right now. It's called online learning. It gives, and technology is providing the means for us to defeat this old system. Okay, and it's developing. We're learning a lot. We're adapting to it. But the same kind of thing is happening in journalism right now. As conservatives, we need to be optimists. We need to look for opportunities. We need to seize them. We have them in front of us right now. I think we know what to do. We at least know what we should be engaged. We can't withdraw and think it's all decline and demise, because we're going to come back and we're going to take over these things again. Someone said, I think this is a Jonah Goldberg line. He says, you know, facts are conservative things, and the more we report them, the more we talk about them, the better off we're all going to be. Thank you.
All right.